Welcome to Daily English Podcast. Today I'm sharing a powerful true story. It begins with a quiet student, afraid to speak. But one moment, just 10 minutes, changed everything. This is more than a story about learning English. It's a story about courage, about rising when you feel small, about the power of using your voice, even when it's shaking. Whether you're learning English or learning how to believe in yourself, this episode is for you. He always sat at the back of the classroom, not because he was lazy, not because he didn't care, but because the back was safe. From there, he could observe the world without being seen too much. He could take notes quietly. He could avoid questions, avoid attention, avoid mistakes. He liked English, but he feared speaking. The words in his mind felt too slow to come out. Sometimes his accent embarrassed him. Sometimes people laughed, and so he stayed quiet. But deep down, he wanted to be heard. Deep down, he knew English was important, not just for school, but for life. Jobs, opportunities, confidence, communication. He knew it. He just didn't believe he was ready. Not yet. One morning, something unusual happened. Their English teacher walked in late, holding a broken microphone. The classroom buzzed. Some students laughed. Some just sighed. The teacher looked tired. She glanced at the class and said, "I'm too tired to talk today, so someone else will. Give today's talk, a short one, just 10 minutes. The classroom froze. Nobody volunteered. Then, a miracle. She called a name. His name. He felt his heart drop to his feet. He didn't have time to prepare. No notes, no script. Just 10 minutes. Just his own story. He could have said no. He could have refused. But something inside him whispered, if not now, when? So he stood up, hands shaking, mouth dry, eyes looking everywhere but the students. And then he spoke. He spoke about his first time learning English. He told a story about watching cartoons with subtitles, how he copied words into a notebook, how he dreamed of becoming a tour guide one day, how he once cried when a foreign tourist asked him something and he couldn't answer. He didn't use perfect grammar. He forgot some words, his voice cracked. But he kept going, and by the end, the classroom was silent, not from boredom, from surprise. He had never spoken so much in front of others, and yet something in his words felt real. It wasn't just an English talk, it was honesty. When he finished, he thought he had failed. He sat down, embarrassed. He looked at the floor. Then someone clapped. Then another, and another. And before he could understand what was happening, the whole class was applauding him. He blinked. Not because of the sound, but because of what he suddenly saw. Their faces had changed. He wasn't invisible anymore. That moment was small, 10 minutes. But something shifted inside him. He didn't become a confident speaker overnight. He still made grammar mistakes. He still needed subtitles when watching movies, but he no longer avoided the front row. He started asking questions. He started answering them too. Slowly, carefully, bravely. And that's how change begins, not with a big speech, but with a single decision to try. That talk wasn't a performance, it was a beginning. It showed him that people don't expect perfection, they expect courage, They expect real effort. They respect truth. And in those 10 minutes, he gave all. 3. After that day, something magical happened. He stopped calling himself bad at English. He started calling himself a learner. And that's where true growth begins. When the door opens, don't look back. After that 10-minute talk, his world didn't change instantly. He still walked home on the same dusty road. He still wore the same school uniform, a little faded from too many washes. He still studied under the same dim light each night, sometimes falling asleep with his book open. But something inside him was different. A quiet confidence had started growing, like a seed planted in silence. He began showing up early to class, not to impress anyone, but because he was hungry to learn. He listened more closely, took notes more carefully. He paid attention not just to what was being taught, but to what wasn't being said. That's what English does to you. It makes you curious. It makes you listen to the world differently. He started writing in a small notebook. New words, phrases he liked, sentences that sounded strong or beautiful, not long essays. Not grammar drills, just small pieces of language that felt meaningful. Words like believe, progress, begin, enough, hope. He didn't realize it then, but he was building his voice. Not just in English, but in life. The same boy who once sat silently at the back of class now sat near the front asking questions like, how do I sound more natural in English? What does this phrase really mean? Can I try to say it another way? Not because he was trying to be perfect, but because he had tasted what growth feels like. And once you feel that, really feel it, you can't unlearn it. Most people only see the results, but no one sees the hours behind them. He practiced speaking at night, when the house was quiet. Sometimes in front of a mirror. Sometimes while washing dishes. Sometimes while pretending he was giving a talk again. He wasn't trying to copy someone else's voice. He was searching for his own. His pace was slow, but steady. And the slow path, though it's hard, is often the strongest one. Because when you grow slowly, you grow deeply. One day, their school announced an English competition, a short talk. 3 minutes, any topic. He wasn't planning to enter. He thought, I already had my moment, that's enough. But his English teacher handed him a paper. I already registered your name, she said. He laughed nervously. But deep down, he felt something powerful. Trust. She believed in him even when he didn't, and that gave him strength. What would he talk about? Not sports, not science, not a book review. He chose something simple, something close to the heart. How? English helped me believe in myself. He didn't try to sound clever. He didn't memorize fancy words. He just shared his truth, like before. Like always, and when the competition day came, he walked on stage, his knees trembled. But his voice didn't, because this time, he knew something he hadn't known before. He belonged there. The stage, the silence, the strength. The room was full of students. Some were whispering, some were waiting, some were just hoping it would end quickly. He stepped forward slowly. No music, no lights, no fancy background. Just him, a boy with a voice. And a story. He stood behind the microphone. The same kind of microphone he once feared. The kind that used to make his words feel small. But now, he saw it differently. It wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. He began. I used to think English was just a subject, something to pass, something to avoid. But then I realized it was something bigger, something alive. He shared about his first 10-minute talk, about the moment he felt heard, about what it taught him, not about grammar, but about self-worth. He said, English didn't just teach me how to speak. It taught me that I have something to say. He paused. Not because he forgot the words, but because he wanted the words to land, and they did. You could feel it. Even the students who weren't paying attention before had looked up. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic, but he was real. Later that day, they announced the winner. He wasn't expecting anything. He was proud just for showing up. But when they called his name, his heart froze. People clapped. His classmates shouted, and for a second, he couldn't move. Because in that moment, the boy who used to avoid every chance to speak was now being celebrated because he spoke. It wasn't the trophy that mattered. It was what it meant, that his voice was worth hearing. That, his story had weight. That courage, however shaky, still wins. That moment spread, like quiet ripples in water. Other students started asking him for help. How do you practice? What should I talk about? Can I learn to speak like that too? He never said, it's easy. Instead, he said, it's possible. You just have to begin before you're ready. He wasn't the best speaker in the school, not the most fluent, not the most confident, but he had something most people never use, his own voice, and that made him powerful. Soon, he began joining more activities, English clubs, practice groups, small events where he could keep learning. He didn't win every time. He still made mistakes, still forgot words, still stumbled, but now he smiled through it, because now he understood. The goal wasn't to sound perfect. The goal was to grow with every word. One night, while lying in bed, he wrote a sentence in his notebook. It said, "One day I'll help others find their voice too." That was the moment a new dream was born. He no longer just wanted to learn English. He wanted to use it, to teach, to inspire, to lift others who felt the way he once did. 10 minutes. That's all it had taken to begin everything. And now his life had a direction. From small stages to bigger steps. He didn't have money for extra classes. He didn't have a fancy phone to record high-quality videos. He didn't have bookshelves full of English novels. But he had determination. And that was enough to start. He used what he had. Old textbooks, free YouTube channels, school handouts passed down from older students. And every day he practiced, 5 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes before bed, sometimes even while waiting, in line or walking home. He made English a part of his life. Not just a subject. He started speaking to shopkeepers in English. He asked for directions in English, even if he already knew the way. He would read signs, menus, even shampoo bottles, out loud. Every small moment became practice. He wasn't chasing fluency. He was chasing comfort, the comfort of not being afraid anymore. That's something most people don't talk about, the why. Real goal for many English learners isn't sounding like a native speaker. It's feeling safe enough to speak, to try, to exist in the language without fear. As he grew more confident, he started helping his classmates. He never made them feel small. He didn't correct them to show off. He remembered how it felt to be nervous, to to be unsure, to feel behind. So he helped with kindness. One friend was afraid to read out loud, so they practiced together after school. Another friend had trouble writing, so he showed them how to start with just one sentence a day. It wasn't about teaching. It was about lifting, and in lifting others, he grew stronger too. Months later, something unexpected happened. His English teacher nominated him for a special youth program in the city. He had to send in a short video speaking English. Then, if accepted, he would attend workshops and meet other students who loved learning. At first, he hesitated. "I'm just a small-town student," he thought. "There are others better than me." But then he remembered those 10 minutes, the talk that started it all. And once again he whispered to himself, "If not now, when?" So he filmed the video, spoke with his whole heart, sent it, and waited. Weeks passed. Then one morning, an email arrived. He was accepted. The workshops would be in person. He would need to travel to the city. He had never been to the capital before, never stayed in a hotel, never met students from other provinces. He was excited. He was scared. But more than anything, he was ready. When he arrived, the city overwhelmed him. Tall buildings, fast traffic, new smells. But the moment he stepped into the training room, something clicked. He wasn't alone. There were students just like him, shy, eager, hopeful. They shared stories, practiced together, laughed over grammar mistakes. It wasn't about who had the best accent. It was about connection. For the first time, he didn't feel like a learner. He felt like a part of something bigger. Learning to belong that week in the city changed him, not just because he learned new things, but because he saw what was possible. He met students who had struggled, just like him. One girl had taught herself English from street signs. Another boy practiced by reading comic books out loud to his younger siblings. Some were from big schools. Some were from small villages. But what connected them all was this. They had all said yes to one scary moment, just like he had, and that made him feel something he had never felt before. Belonging. He didn't speak the most during the group discussions. But when he did, people listened, not because his English was perfect, but because it was full of care. Because he meant what he said. Because he didn't speak to impress. He spoke to connect. There's a quiet strength in that, and it doesn't come from grammar. It comes from being brave enough to show who you are, even when your voice shakes. That kind of strength lasts. After the program ended, he returned home with new eyes. He looked at his school differently. Not as a place that limited him, but as the place where his journey had begun. He looked at his friends differently, too. They weren't behind. They were just waiting for someone to show them it was possible. So he started a small after-school group, just 5 students at first. They met in an empty classroom, no projector, no fancy tools, just one goal, to practice speaking English, out loud. Together, without fear, he welcomed everyone, even the quiet ones. Even the ones who said, "I'm bad at English." He told them, "That's what I used to say too." And slowly, something beautiful happened. They laughed together. They stumbled through sentences together. They clapped when someone finished a full paragraph, even if it had mistakes. Because it wasn't about perfect English. It was about real effort. It was about showing up. It was about creating a space where mistakes weren't shameful. They were signs of progress. He knew not everyone would stay. Some would come once and never return. Some would join only for the fun. Some would drop out when exams came, but that didn't stop him, because he had learned something powerful. Not all seeds bloom in the same season. His job wasn't to force growth. It was to plant belief, and belief takes time. Sometimes months, sometimes years, sometimes only a moment. Like those 10 minutes that had changed his life. Every week he kept showing up, even when he was tired, even when no one clapped, even when he felt like maybe it wasn't working, because deep down he knew consistency creates transformation, not suddenly, not loudly, but silently, faithfully, like water to a seed, and that's how people grow. That's how he had grown. And now he was giving others the same chance. From English learner to community leader, one day during a school event, the principal asked if anyone wanted to speak on stage. Most students avoided eye contact. Some giggled nervously. But someone raised his hand. This time, it wasn't him. It was a girl from the after-school group. The same girl who once said, "I don't speak English." She walked up, took the mic, and shared a short story. Simple, honest, and brave. The audience clapped. The principal smiled, and he watched from the side of the stage. Heart full. That's when he realized something powerful. He wasn't just changing his life anymore. He was changing others too. That day was special. But it wasn't a surprise. He had seen it coming, because courage is contagious. When one person speaks, another begins to believe they can too. It's like a circle. One voice leads to another. One moment of bravery opens the door for 10 more. That's what his journey had become. A quiet movement. One that didn't need headlines. Or loud applause, or viral videos, just real people helping each other grow. Over time, he started receiving letters. Some were written on lined paper, folded neatly. Others were scribbled in notebooks and handed to him between classes. One said, "Because of you, I tried speaking English at the market." Another wrote, "Thank you for not laughing at me when I couldn't pronounce things. I'm learning." Each letter reminded him, your influence isn't measured by followers, it's measured by impact, and his impact was real. Not because he was famous, but because he cared, because he showed up, because he believed when others doubted themselves. English had once been his fear, but now it had become his bridge. A bridge between people, between silence and voice, between dreams and action. It had connected him to opportunities, friendships, and a sense of purpose. And most of all, it had helped him discover something that can't be learned from a textbook. The strength to speak. Even when it's hard, years passed, he kept learning, he kept helping. And one day, he received a phone call. It was from a local learning center. They were looking for someone to teach basic English to young children. Nothing big. Just a weekend class. Volunteer work. But when they asked, he didn't hesitate. He said, yes, because in his heart he was no longer just a student. He was something else now, a guide, a teacher, a reminder that change begins small. The first day as a teacher. The classroom was small. Plastic chairs, a dusty whiteboard, a cracked ceiling fan. But for him it felt like a palace. Because for the first time, he wasn't there to learn. He was there to guide. The children looked at him with wide eyes. Some were shy. Some giggled at his every word. Some struggled to say, "Hello?" He remembered that feeling. He had lived it. And now he had the chance to walk them through it, gently, patiently, with love. He didn't have a British accent. He didn't sound like an American movie, but he spoke clearly, with intention, with care. And that was enough. Because teaching isn't about impressing, it's about connecting. He used games, songs, stories from his own journey. His stories became like small lanterns in the dark, lighting the way for others who were just starting their own journey. And slowly he started being invited to speak more, online, in community centers, even on local radio. But he never forgot where it began. No matter how far his message reached, he stayed grounded. He still swept the classroom floor before lessons, still carried chairs when no one else did, still listened more than he spoke, because he knew. The moment you believe you've arrived, you stop growing. And he never wanted to stop growing. Not as a speaker, not as a learner, not as a human being. He reminded himself often, "I'm still that boy, just with a stronger voice now." One quiet morning, while walking alone, he thought about everything. The classroom, the stage, the first shaky talk, the children, the smiles, the failures, the wins. And he realized something. His journey wasn't about English. It was about becoming. Becoming someone who dares. Becoming someone who uplifts. Becoming someone who never gives up on others or themselves. And that realization was more powerful than any trophy because it meant this: he had truly changed. And now he was helping others change too. The boy, the talk, and the legacy. Years later, someone asked him during a community event, "What was the turning point for you? When did everything really begin?" He didn't have to think long. He smiled gently and said, "A 10-minute English talk. One moment I didn't ask for. One opportunity I almost said no to." He paused. Then he added, "And that's the thing. Most life-changing moments don't come with a warning. They don't wait until you're ready. They ask you to show up as you are." The classroom had changed. The students were new. Even the walls had fresh paint. But when he walked through that hallway again, something felt familiar, like returning to the place where your story first started. This time, he wasn't nervous. He wasn't unsure. He stood tall, because he had walked the full circle, from fear to confidence, from silence to voice, from learner to leader. And he had done it without shortcuts, without skipping the hard parts, without pretending to be someone. He wasn't. He never became rich. He never traveled the world. His name wasn't printed in big magazines, but he helped others believe. He helped them rise. He helped them feel seen, and that is a legacy worth more than gold. He often said to his students, "The greatest thing you can ever give someone is not knowledge, it's belief. Show someone that they matter, and you give them a reason to rise." This story is about one boy, but really, it's about all of us. All of us who have been afraid to speak, afraid to try, afraid to be seen failing. All of us who wonder if we have anything worth saying. And the truth is, you don't have to be fluent to be powerful. You don't need perfect grammar to be understood. You don't need a stage to make an impact. You just need courage, a voice, and one small moment of boldness. So maybe the question isn't, am I ready? Maybe the real question is, what if this one moment, this one chance to speak, could open a door to everything I've been hoping for? What if a 10-minute talk is all it takes? What if your whole story starts with one brave yes? The message that reaches. Farther long after his first talk faded into memory, its echo continued to spread. He received a message from a teacher in another province. She had found one of his stories online. She had played it in her class. Her students had listened in silence. Some even cried. She wrote, "Your story reminded my students that someone like them can rise too." That message stayed with him because it proved something he had always believed deep down. Real stories travel farther than you think, not because of fancy language, but because they speak to something deeper than words. They speak to the heart. He started creating simple learning materials, short videos, audio clips. Printable guides, he gave them away for free. Not everyone could afford classes, but everyone deserved a chance. He wanted people to see English differently, not as a wall, but as a window into connection, opportunity, self-respect. Because when someone says, "I'm learning English," they're really saying, "I'm building my voice. I'm stepping into the world. I'm taking control of my future." And that's a powerful thing. He met learners who were afraid to open their mouths. They'd say, "My English is broken. I'm not good enough. I'm embarrassed by my accent." And he'd reply, "So was I." Then he'd tell them the story, the shaky first talk, the trembling voice, the moment he thought he failed, but didn't, and their eyes would widen. Their posture would change. Hope would flicker again, because shame can't survive truth. And his truth was simple. Your voice is valuable, even when it's imperfect. Especially when it's imperfect. He continued teaching, not in giant lecture halls, but in living rooms, libraries, and online spaces where trust grew slowly. He trained others to lead. Teenagers who had once been his students were now running small English groups in their own neighborhoods. They carried the torch, not to be like him, but to become themselves. That's what true teaching does. It doesn't create copies. It creates confidence. One day, a quiet student raised her hand and asked, "Why do you care so much about helping us?" He paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because it touched something deep. He looked around the classroom, then smiled and said, "Because someone once gave me a chance, and it changed everything." And that was the truth. A 10-minute moment, a shaky beginning, a path he hadn't planned, but followed with his whole heart, his voice, his way. He never tried to sound like someone else, not a native speaker, not a perfect teacher, not a social media personality. He just spoke his truth, with warmth, with patience, with humility. And in doing so, he became a voice people trusted. Because he didn't teach from a pedestal. He taught from experience, from failure, from quiet victories that most people overlook. And that made all the difference. Every talk he gave, he began the same way. "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to remind you, you don't need to be perfect to be powerful." People listened, because they could see it wasn't a performance. It was presence. A person showing up with honesty, not ego. That's rare, and that's why it worked. One night, he found his old notebook again. He opened it gently. ran his fingers over the pages, and on the first page, he saw the words he had written long ago: hope, believe, try, begin. He smiled. Those words had carried him through everything. He didn't need big plans back then, just small reminders, one page at a time, one step at a time. And now, looking back, that simple notebook had become his compass. With help from a few friends, he began designing a small community program. The goal was simple: to help students speak English with confidence. Not perfect grammar. Not textbook memorization, just confidence. They called it Voices Rising, no fees, no pressure, just a space to practice, to make mistakes, to grow together, and the first class filled up in 2 days because the need was real, and the trust he had built over years was now bearing fruit. Sometimes he still got nervous before speaking. Sometimes he still mispronounced a word. Sometimes he forgot what he was going to say. But now he didn't shrink back. He smiled, paused, and kept going, because he had learned something beautiful. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward anyway, and that decision, made over and over again, had shaped not just his English, but his entire life. The gift of listening. He became known not just for how he spoke, but for how he listened. When students struggled, he didn't rush to correct. He waited. He encouraged. He let them finish their thoughts, because he remembered how painful it was to be interrupted mid-sentence, how discouraging it felt when someone corrected you without kindness. So he chose a different way. He made people feel safe, and that safety became the soil where confidence could grow. He created a new activity called Beautiful Mistakes. Every student had to share a sentence they got wrong and what they learned from it. There was no shame, only laughter, lightness, progress. Because when mistakes stop feeling like failure, they start feeling like fuel, and the students loved it. They laughed at their own sentences. They clapped for one another. They grew faster, because they weren't afraid anymore. He watched with quiet joy. This was more than English class. This was transformation. He often reminded his students that English wasn't just about language. It was about life. Every new word was a seed. Every sentence a small step forward. Every mistake a doorway to something better. He told them, learning English will help you apply for jobs. But more than that, it will teach you to face fear, to stay curious, to keep growing when it's uncomfortable. And those were lessons they could carry into any part of their future. One afternoon, as he finished class, a young man stood at the door. He looked familiar, but older. Then he realized it was one of his earliest students, the boy who once refused to speak. The one who used to whisper every word, now standing tall, wearing a university badge. Holding a small notebook, they sat and talked. The young man said, "I'm studying education. I want to become a teacher, because of you." And in that moment, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt peace. You don't always get to see the seeds you plant become trees. But sometimes, life gives you a glimpse. And it's enough to remind you. Every act of courage creates a ripple. Every kind word echoes farther than you know. Every small beginning holds big potential. He had once been the student who was afraid to speak, Now he was the reason others spoke louder. Looking back, without regret, some evenings he would sit alone under the stars, no camera, no noise, just quiet. He would think about the journey, from sitting in the back row, afraid to raise his hand, to standing on stages, helping others find their voice. From repeating English words under his breath, to teaching hundreds to speak with confidence. He didn't regret the slow beginning. He didn't regret the mistakes. He didn't regret the fear. Because those things were part of the path. They were the reason he had grown strong. Not in spite of them, but because of them. One day he was invited to speak to a new group of teachers. They wanted to know how to inspire students who were shy or struggling. He brought something with him to that talk. His first notebook. He held it up and said, "This is where it all began. Not with perfect grammar, not with flawless pronunciation, but with hope and a willingness to begin." The room was silent. Some teachers wiped their eyes because they weren't just learning how to teach English. They were remembering why they started teaching in the first place. People often asked him, "How did you become so confident?" He would smile and answer honestly, "I didn't. I just kept showing up even when I wasn't." Confidence didn't come overnight. It came through action, through failure, through hundreds of small choices. To speak up, to keep learning, to give himself permission to grow slowly. That was the real answer, and that truth helped others more than any motivational speech ever could. He didn't want to be the only success story, so he started mentoring others, not just students, but young teachers too. He taught them how to teach with compassion, how to encourage without pressure, how to make space for voices that trembled. He always said, "If you want to change a life, don't ask for perfect effort. Ask for honest effort, and be the kind of person who claps for progress." In that way, he didn't just build a classroom. He built a movement, a circle of support, a table that kept growing bigger. He didn't have fancy awards, or viral fame, or shiny certificates hanging on the wall. But he had something more lasting, the respect of his students, the gratitude of families, the joy of watching others rise. And that was enough. Because the impact we leave behind is measured not in applause, but in the quiet ways we make others believe in themselves. The young girl in the front row during one of his free weekend workshops. He noticed a girl who reminded him of himself. She never spoke, never raised her hand. Always sat in the front row, eyes wide, hands folded tightly in her lap. Week after week she came back, listened, took notes, but never said a word, until one day. He handed her a small card. It said, "You don't have to speak today, but when you do, I'll be listening." She didn't say anything in that moment. She just nodded, but the next week she whispered one sentence during the activity. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was hers, and it was the beginning. He had learned over the years that not everyone needs pushing. Some students just need permission, a little room, a little trust. So he created a space where silence was okay, where progress didn't have a deadline, where courage could rise at its own pace. And that's where students began to thrive, not from pressure, but from gentle belief. As he watched that girl speak her first sentence, he thought back to the day he first stood to speak, back to the broken microphone. The silence that followed. The classroom filled with classmates who didn't know he had something to say, And now he was the one making space for others. It felt like a full circle, but also a brand new beginning, because now the question wasn't, what can I achieve? It had become, what can I help others achieve? And that question had changed the direction of his life. At the end of each year, his students wrote letters. To themselves. To him. To the class. They shared their struggles, their small victories, their hopes. One letter said, "Before this class, I thought I was too stupid to speak English. Now I speak to my baby sister in English every day." Another said, "When I first came here, I thought you would laugh at my voice. But you didn't. You helped me hear beauty in it." He kept those letters in a box, not to show off, but to remind himself why he began. That's what it had become. Not just a single success story, but hundreds of stories, each one lit by the spark of a moment that almost didn't happen. A moment that started with a teacher too tired to talk, a broken microphone, a trembling voice, a boy who said yes when everything inside him said no. And from that single moment came all of this. The magic of saying yes, he often reflected on that day. The one where it all began. He had almost said no. He almost stayed in his seat. Almost let fear win. Almost waited for a better time. But something inside him whispered, "Say yes. Just once. See where it leads." And that one yes had changed everything. Not immediately, not magically, but deeply. Step by step, word by word, talk by talk. He had created a life not built on luck, but on willingness. He never planned to become a teacher, never dreamed of being a public speaker. He only wanted to stop feeling invisible, to understand English, to feel proud when he said his name. But the road led him somewhere better than he imagined. Because when you walk forward, even uncertain, the path has a way of opening up. And sometimes the road you didn't plan becomes the place where you're most needed. When people asked him what his biggest achievement was, he didn't talk about the classes, or the workshops, or the videos. He said, "My biggest achievement is every time someone who was once silent decides to speak. Because that's how you change the world. Not all at once. Not with fireworks, but with moments. A kind word, a quiet talk. A soft clap after a trembling voice. Moments that feel small, but echo forever." One day, he received a letter in handwriting he didn't recognize. There was no name. Just these words. "I never had the courage to speak in class, but I listened to every story you told, and I just wanted you to know I started teaching English in my village this year because of you." He folded the letter slowly, pressed it to his chest, and let a tear fall. Not from sadness, but from completion, because that's what stories are meant to do, to begin in one heart and live on in another. Years later, during a community ceremony, he was asked to give one last speech. The theme was simple. What would you say to the person you used to be? He stepped up, took a breath, smiled, and said, "I would tell him, you're not invisible, you're not behind, you're just becoming." He paused. "And when your voice trembles, speak anyway, because someone out there is waiting for your story to begin, the memory that never fades, Some memories fade with time, but not that one. The day he stood in front of the class, voice trembling, hands cold, heart pounding. That moment stayed clear in his mind, even years later. He could still feel the silence in the room, still see the puzzled looks, still remember the words he barely managed to say, but most of all, he remembered the moment after. The applause, the look on his teacher's face, the whisper inside him that said, "You did it. You were brave." That whisper became his anchor whenever he felt uncertain again. He went back to that moment, not to relive the fear, but to remember the strength it uncovered. The courage that multiplies. He learned something beautiful through the years. When one person speaks up, it gives others permission to do the same. Courage isn't something you keep, it's something you pass on. Every time he helped a student speak for the first time, he could feel that same ripple starting again. One moment of bravery became a gift that kept moving forward, from student to student, class to class, village to village. And even when he wasn't there to witness it, he knew it was happening, because courage leaves a trail. Eventually, people began inviting him to bigger places. Teacher training seminar in another province, a radio interview, an online panel on rural education. But no matter where he went, he stayed grounded. He always reminded himself, the classroom was never the limit, but it was the beginning, and beginnings matter, because they teach you how to rise, how to speak, how to believe. He carried that spirit everywhere he went, even when the audience grew larger, even when people called him inspiring. He knew he was still learning, still growing, just like he always had. At one workshop, he sat quietly at the back. He wasn't the speaker that day, just a guest. The speaker was a young teacher he had once mentored. She stood on stage. She spoke, clearly. She made people laugh, then reflect. He watched her in awe, not because she was perfect, but because she was powerful. In her own voice, in her own way. And he didn't need to say a word, because in that moment, he saw the full picture. He had become the reason others could rise, and now they were doing the same. Beyond the words as time passed, he realized something deeper. English had given him many tools: confidence, opportunity, a way to teach, to connect, to inspire. But more than that, it had given him the ability to understand people. Because learning a language isn't just about vocabulary, it's about listening, about patience, about stepping into someone else's shoes. He often told his students, when you learn a new language, you learn how to care more deeply. And that's what made his work special. It wasn't about perfect sentences, it was about powerful connections. He started believing something simple. Everyone has a story. But not everyone believes their story matters. His job, his real calling, wasn't to teach people how to speak perfect English. It was to help them find their voice, to help them believe their story was worth telling, even if it was told slowly, even if it was told with an accent, even if it took time, because the world needs real voices, not perfect ones. And that became his mission: to listen, to encourage, to remind people, your voice is enough. Your story is important. And you don't have to wait until you're ready. Over the years, he received more letters from people he didn't remember teaching, from students who only attended a few classes, from strangers who had watched his story online. They said things like, "I watched your video 5 times before, giving my first English presentation. I used your story to encourage my sister to speak up in school. I thought I was too old to learn English. You helped me try anyway." He kept them all, not for pride, but for reminders that what we do in one small moment can live inside someone else for years. He was once that student. He never forgot it. No matter how far he came, no matter how many students he taught, he always remembered. He was once the one sitting in silence. The one who didn't think he belonged. The one who waited at the back, hoping not to be called on. And now, he was calling on others, not to put them on the spot, but to invite them into possibility, because he knew how powerful that invitation could be. He had lived it. The talk that keeps talking, that first 10-minute English talk. It was never just about speaking. It was about stepping forward, about breaking silence, about allowing change to begin. Years later, he realized something. The talk had never really ended. It kept living in every student he taught, in every voice that found the courage to speak, in every classroom where his story was shared. The echo of that moment still traveled, quiet but steady, a reminder that one brave choice can leave a mark that never fades. He didn't wear a microphone most days. He didn't stand under bright lights, but his influence was everywhere. In a teenager who decided to lead her first group, in a father who started reading bedtime stories in English, in a young man who applied for a job because he could now say, "I speak a little English." None of them shouted his name. But he saw the reflection of his journey in their courage. That's the thing about real influence. It's quiet, lasting, unseen, but deeply felt. He never tried to jump ahead. He built slowly, brick by brick, each conversation, each small lesson, each trembling voice that stood up and tried. That's how you build something that lasts. Not with speed, but with steadiness. And now, when people asked him how to begin, he simply said, "Don't look for the perfect moment. Create one, just like I did, with one imperfect, shaky, honest talk." And they believed him, because they could see the proof in his life. The story he hoped would outlive him. He once told a friend, "If I could leave one thing behind, I'd want it to be the belief that speaking up changes lives. Not speaking perfectly, not speaking loudly, just speaking. With honesty, with heart, with courage." He knew he wouldn't always be there to teach, to guide, to lead, but if he could help others begin their own first talks, he had done more than enough, because that meant his story had done its job, not to impress, but to ignite. A classroom without walls. As time passed, the classroom grew larger, not in size, but in reach. People from far away began using his teaching videos. Mothers played them in the kitchen while cooking. Teenagers listened through headphones on their way to school. Young men practiced late at night after long shifts. At work, they called it his classroom. But it had no desks, no whiteboard, no limits. It lived inside voices, inside hearts, inside the desire to try. He had once taught 10 students in a circle. Now he was teaching thousands, one soul at a time. He always reminded people, English is not a wall to keep you out. It's a door that lets you in, into new jobs, into new friendships, into who you can become. And the key, it wasn't talent, it wasn't perfect grammar, It was the choice to knock, to speak, to keep going even if your voice shakes, because the door opens for those who knock with faith. He never told people it would be easy. He told them the truth. You will feel slow. You will feel frustrated. People might not understand you at first. But every sentence you try is a seed, and one day, without warning, it blooms. That's how he learned. That's how he taught. With patience, with honesty, with stories that honored the struggle. Because the struggle is sacred. It's where confidence is built. It's where courage is sharpened. It's where the voice is born, as see. He grew older. People started calling him a mentor, a leader, a teacher of teachers. But he smiled at those titles, because in his heart, he was still that student, the one who said yes to 10 minutes, the one who once shook on stage, the one who stayed late after school to whisper words into a notebook. His greatest hope? That more people would say yes, even when they don't feel ready, because readiness is not the requirement. When the student becomes the spark at a regional conference, he listened as a young teacher took the stage. She spoke with confidence, with clarity, with warmth. And every sentence she shared reminded him of someone, not because she copied his words, but because she carried the same fire. Afterward, she approached him with a quiet smile. She said, "I started because of your story, and now I tell mine to help others begin." That moment stayed with him, because it confirmed what he'd always believed. The goal is not to be the light, it's to spark light in others. His teaching no longer happened only in lessons. It happened in moments. A voice message to a student. Having a bad day. A note slipped into a shy learner's book. A 5-minute encouragement speech at a local center. And slowly he realized he had become more than an English teacher. He was a teacher of belief, of persistence, of hope. And people remembered that. Not how many idioms he taught, but how he made them feel. They remembered. He believed in me when I didn't. And because of that, I kept going. He never stopped learning. He read books, watched talks, listened to conversations in English podcasts and movies. Even after years of teaching, he still made time for practice. Because growth isn't something you outgrow. He still had a learner's heart, still made notes in the margins, still got excited when he discovered a new phrase, still made mistakes and laughed at them. That's what made him relatable. He wasn't pretending to be an expert. He was modeling what lifelong learning looks like. He started visiting high schools to speak about learning, not just English, but mindset, habits, resilience. He told the students, there's no magic shortcut. But if you give a little time every day, you'll look back in 1 year and not recognize yourself. They believed him because he didn't promise quick results. He promised real ones, and he showed them what consistency could do. How far one shaky moment could carry you if you kept going. Willingness is. Whenever he held workshops or small classes, he made sure of one thing. There was always an empty chair. Not because someone forgot to show up, but because it was a symbol, a reminder that there's always space for one more voice. One more learner, one more story waiting to be heard. Sometimes students asked, "Why don't you put the chair away?" He'd smile and say, "Because someone out there still thinks they're not good enough, but when they're ready, I want them to know there's room. One evening, after a long day of teaching, he walked home slowly. The sky was orange with sunset. The streets were calm, and for the first time in a while, he let himself stop. He sat on a bench, breathed in the warm air, and looked up. He wasn't rich. He didn't live in a big city. His phone was old, his shoes worn, but in that moment, he felt something powerful, fulfillment. He had spent his life giving what he had, and in return, he had received something rare: the joy of helping others rise. Years later, his students would remember him, not just for the lessons, but for the way he looked at them when they tried, the way he waited patiently for them to finish a sentence, the way he said, "You're improving, I see it." That's what stayed, not perfect grammar, not exams, but the feeling of being seen, of being valued, of being invited into growth. And because of that, many of them became teachers too, or mentors, or guides for others still walking the early road. That was always his goal: not to be the hero, not to be the center, but to pass the light, to show that learning English isn't about showing off, it's about showing up, for yourself, for others, for the future you want to build. And now, that light was in hundreds of hands, spoken in hundreds of accents, told through hundreds of personal journeys, all sparked by one shaky, imperfect, powerful moment. 10 minutes, one voice, one life forever changed. Near the end of the session, one of the mentors, his former student, stood up. She asked if anyone wanted to close the session with a short English talk. There was silence. Then that quiet girl raised her hand. It wasn't a confident hand. It trembled slightly. But it was raised. She stood, opened her notebook, and began. Her voice cracked. She mispronounced 2 words. She paused midway through, but she didn't stop. She finished. Everyone clapped. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He was sitting in the back, smiling quietly, because he knew this was the echo, the one he had started, the one that would continue long after him. He walked home slowly that day. The streets hadn't changed. The buildings were still small. The light poles flickered like they always had. But inside him, something had shifted. He wasn't chasing anymore. He wasn't proving anymore. He was passing it on. The courage, the voice, the spark. Later that night, he sat with his notebook, now old, worn and soft at the edges. He turned to the last page and wrote one final line. 10 minutes gave me a voice. I used it, and now it's in their hands. He closed the notebook gently, placed it on the shelf, and turned off the light. Not because the story was over, but because it was shining somewhere else now, in another classroom, in another trembling voice, in another student, brave enough to speak. You never know whose life your voice might change, so speak. Even if your voice shakes, speak, because someone, somewhere is waiting to hear exactly what only you can say. Thank you for listening to this story. One small talk, one quiet student, one moment of bravery. That's all it took to start a ripple that touched many lives. So, if you've been waiting for the perfect time to begin, this is your sign. Your voice matters. Your story has weight. And someone out there is waiting to hear it, speak, try, begin. I believe in you, and I hope. Now you believe in yourself too.